just for those attending, for your awareness, my name is Jamie Pitts, and I am intending to co-host this meeting with Kyle Gingrich Hebert, who is based in Canada. There's a massive internet outage all over Canada currently, and I got an email from him a couple hours ago alerting me that it was likely that he would not be able to join. And it seems that fate is coming to pass. So it will probably just be me. As Kyle and I planned, well, first of all, Kyle was intending to start this meeting and give a presentation, so I will do that apparently. But the way this will go is I'll talk a little bit about the research networks that we've been developing over the last few years. And then I'd like to hear from those of you on the call who would like to share. I'm aware that there may be some people watching on a television, and if that's you, I would love to hear from you. Get an email from you later, and I'll share my email address later just to hear what you're up to.
If you're joining online through the virtual hub and you would rather join where you can communicate and talk, you can go back to where you got it, and there should be a link to the Zoom session. So you can join that way if you'd rather be able to talk now.
Thank you, Allison. Allison is our host. And I don't know, is there any other technical stuff we should discuss before I launch in?
If there are needs for interpretation, or if there are interpreters here, which I'm not currently aware that anyone here is planning to interpret, I would set that up. But it doesn't look like that's a need. So this will just be an English presentation.
Yeah, and if anybody, well, I'll put the thing with Zoom, I can put something in the chat, and then if they join later, they wouldn't see it. So maybe periodically, if people join, I will announce again the possibility of interpretation. But I'll
try to take care of that as people join.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So again, my name is Jamie Pitts, and I teach Anabaptist studies at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana, USA. I am also the director of the Institute of Mennonite Studies, which is the research and publishing arm of the seminary. And I came into this role at Institute of Mennonite Studies about 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the first things I did in that role was to start trying to figure out what other institutions, sibling institutions at that time around North America were up to in terms of research activities, and wondering what kind of partnerships might emerge if we were to have some more intentional conversation with one another than was the case at the time. And so I reached out to a number of different institutions, mostly universities and seminaries that had some kind of Anabaptist or Mennonite related research center or a journal. And I convened a meeting on Zoom 5 years ago with research center, Anabaptist related research center directors and journal editors. And the purpose of that was to see, gain awareness of what each other were doing, but also to see if there were possibilities for collaboration that might emerge. In that first meeting, there was some real interest and excitement about actually being there together and seeing who each other were. Some awareness that often we operate kind of in silos without much contact with one another. There's also some caution about assuming too much shared ethos and identity, given the fact that, for instance, some research centers or journals may be very intentionally directed toward the church and supporting and facilitating the church's ministry. Some research centers or journals maybe have see themselves as more kind of purely academic mission. And so there was a caution not to confuse those two different kinds of activities, even if there was acknowledgement that there was points of contact among them. But probably the larger two items that came out of that first meeting 5 years ago was to request, first of all, some kind of shared database of activities so that we could learn about what each other are doing, so that we could avoid schedule conflicts, conference scheduling, for instance. So we could learn about job opportunities or calls for papers or what have you. So first request that came out of that meeting was a database, a shared kind of portal that we could access information about each other's work. The second was that we expand the conversation to be more global. As I mentioned, it was the initial meeting was entirely among North American research centers and journals. So from that point, we made an effort. Well, at that point, I was making this effort, so I made the effort to reach out to partners in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, and Africa as well. And over the next few years, we began to steadily have more participation from across the world, and again, representing a really wide variety of different kinds of activities, research activities. I was able at the second global Mennonite peace building conference in the Netherlands 3 or 4 years ago to host a meeting like this with participants there, and that really expanded the conversation in a really wonderful way. So we've been working at that expansion, and one of the main things we wanted to do to try to expand our arena of conversation, expand the circle of conversation, was to host a workshop at Mennonite World Conference. And so we had planned initially to do this in Indonesia. I think, was it 1 or even 2 years ago when the original conference was scheduled. And even at that time, when there were intended to be commission meetings prior to Mennonite World Conference, we were going to participate in and have a workshop at the Higher Education Network meeting. As of course things have changed, we're on Zoom now, but the purpose of this meeting is to try to connect some of the conversations that a variety of research centers and journal editors connected to the Anabaptist Mennonite world have been having over the past 5 years to the work of Mennonite World Conference. And particularly to see, are there ways that this emerging network, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specific network that's emerged in a moment, but this network are there ways that it can really connect with and serve a Mennonite World Conference audience beyond the kind of mostly still North American and European academic focused network that we have largely connected with. So I'm going to pause here and show you. So I talked about the first meeting we had 5 years ago, and we've had meetings on Zoom once a year in addition to the meeting I had in person in the Netherlands 3 or 4 years ago. So one of the requests was to have a more global conversation. That's part of the purpose of having a Mennonite World Conference workshop. But the other request, again, was to have a database. And Allison, I don't know if you're on here still. I just realized I did not request screen sharing ability, so I don't know if I can even.
You're co-host, so you should be able. Oh wait, I made the wrong person co-host. I had one job to do.
I liked being co-host for a little while. It was kind of nice.
Would you like to share anything, Carol? Share your screen.
I'm getting it. Here we go. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much. So the other thing we did was, and I should say this is really the work of the Toronto Mennonite Theological Center, was to create this website on their page. And Kyle, who again was intended to be presenting with me here today, but because of a power outage in Canada is unable to join. He and his staff really put this together. And so this is a database with, again, calls for papers, conferences, job announcements, grant opportunities, links to journals, book series, online resources, and many, many research centers. With the invitation for additional information. This is supposed to be, again, serving the variety of kinds of institutions and agencies that are engaged in Anabaptist Mennonite related research. So if that's you, and I assume that is, or else you would not likely be here, this is a resource for you. So I will share the link to this, but I wanted you to be aware from the beginning that this is one of the projects that we have accomplished as we have tried to develop global research networks. And I'm going to go back to the top because I want to show the case of this title, Anabaptist Mennonite Scholars Network. Some of you I know have been around the Mennonite research world long enough that you remember this title. And I did my PhD in Scotland in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and I would still get a little blue newsletter with from this network that would have short theological essays, but much of it was kind of updating whether you were a sociologist with Mennonite family connections who happened to work at a state university in the US, or whether you were a Mennonite pastor and passionately engaged in research and you wanted to share something. This was a kind of meeting place, this network, and it was largely through these newsletters, these print newsletters that were mailed out. That network was kind of organized by the Toronto Mennonite Theological Center and the Institute of Mennonite Studies at AMBS. So part of what we've done as these conversations have developed is to renew or resuscitate this Anabaptist Mennonite Scholars Network, the AMSN. And so that's essentially the network that we are sharing about tonight, or this morning, depending on where you are, is the Anabaptist Mennonite Scholars Network. And so you can read more about it here, but again, part of the mission of this network is to connect people through this database that only really can exist if those of you who are engaged in these kind of activities come here and submit your news and events, or if you write Kyle or myself and ask us to update that. So from the very beginning here, I just wanted you to alert you to the network's website and to invite you to share and to make use of this resource. If you're looking for a job, if you're interested in conferences near you, or if you're planning a conference and want to see what other conferences may be clashing with your conference, there's an incredible variety. One of the things that's just astounded me is the incredible variety of research centers, incredible activities. One of the things we do on our annual call, and what I'll give each of you on this call a chance to do in a few moments, is whoever is there, we share a bit about our institution's research activities. And it's always just incredibly enlightening and encouraging to hear about all the different activities that this incredible variety of institutions is involved in. So again, let me share that web link with you. So the Anabaptist, through these conversations we've been having for the last 5 years, we have rejuvenated the Anabaptist Mennonite Scholars Network. And it's under that banner that we have this web resource that we invite you and encourage you to make use of. And it's also under that banner that we are meeting now with the intent of exploring further what it might mean to connect this network to a global audience and global contributors and participants engaged in this kind of research. So that's really the kind of presentation that I have to share. And again, Kyle was actually prepared to give a presentation, so he might have said much more and more interesting things, but hopefully this will suffice as just a general introduction of the aims of the network and the kinds of things we've been up to over the last couple years. So what I'd like to do for the rest of our time, and I'm guessing we will not spend probably the full time, this is a smaller group at least that I can see on Zoom, but what I'd like to do is to give you a chance to share some about the activities that you're involved with. If you're connected to an institution, are there book series or conferences that you would like other people to be aware of? And anything you'd like to share about kind of research activities that you're engaged in. This would be less sharing about like, I'm writing this essay on this topic, more about I'm kind of engaged in these more networks or institutions or research movements. So once we do a round of that, then I'll take some notes on what you said and see if there's any discussion points that might emerge. The discussion point I certainly want us to visit is related to this question of how might a network like this serve an audience like Mennonite World Conference. And so since we're here in the Mennonite World Conference workshop space, I hope we can engage that for at least a few minutes. And when we're done, we'll be done. We don't have to try to stretch this out, but if we get in a good conversation, then we've got some time to pursue that. So I'll just start by saying a few things about the Institute of Mennonite Studies and some of the things we do. And then I will just kind of go, I'll put the names in a list on the chat, and you can just kind of go in order and share a bit about yourself and any research activities that you're connected to. So again, I'm the director of the Institute of Mennonite Studies, and we have a few different projects kind of that are ongoing. One of them is Vision, a journal of church and ministry. It's kind of a practical theology journal that Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary and Canadian Mennonite University partner on. We also have a journal called Anabaptist Witness, which is focused on global church and mission. Sarah Bixler here just co-edited with Pablo Kim, a great issue on formation and mission and witness that you can find on our website, including an excellent essay from Sarah herself. So that's another journal that we have. So we have a couple journals. We have a variety of book series, Classics of the Radical Reformation, a translation series, a biblical studies series. Our most recent edition is a series, the Studies in Anabaptist Theology and Ethics. And we're always looking for good monograph recommendations on that. We're also published books out of our series, and Carol, we're just wrapping up a book, really important book on abuse and power in the church that Carol has been co-editing. So we love to hear book pitches from authors and welcome conversations, as well as contributions to our journals. we do a variety of kind of research support at the seminary for faculty and sometimes staff and students as well, and occasionally host conferences. So I think there's probably a million other things I could say, but I've been on vacation, so those are the things at the top of my head right now, and that's probably long enough from me. But again, I invite you. Some of you may have formal institutional connections you want to share with, others maybe more informal. But I would love to just learn who you are and hear what kinds of activities you're connected with. So Elaine, you're the first on my screen. If you could go, and then I'll put the others in the chat.
Sure, I can go. So I won't have probably as long as much to speak of as you. I'm in my first year of PhD, so I really just like started my academic career, and I'm doing my PhD like in social anthropology and design research. So I'm on one hand affiliated with the University of Bern and the social anthropology department there, and they have like this focus also on media anthropology. So they use lots of video and sort of also artistic practices in the social anthropological research. And on the other hand, I'm affiliated to the HKB, which is like the applied science part of the applied science university in Bern. And they're with the design research department, and we have a focus, especially the research group that I am in, on design rhetorics. So we use rhetorical, basically a rhetorical framework to look into design, and that's also where my personal research is on, basically on the design rhetorics of nonviolent research. And that's sort of also why I'm much more like looking into Mennonite scholarship on the topic, because I feel like my own understanding of nonviolence is very much shaped by my growing up in a Mennonite family. Yeah, and then I have loose associations also with Bienenberg, and yeah, so it's more like single people that I have connections to. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Thanks so much for sharing, Elaine. And Lane, you can take over, and then the rest can just follow along. I will not intervene from here.
I don't have much to share. I'm something of an independent scholar on Anabaptist thought and economics. I work in finance, but went to ANBS, and I have personal projects, but I'm not associated with any institution.
My name is Sarah Bixler, and I teach at Eastern Mennonite Seminary in Harrisonburg, Virginia, where I'm the Associate Dean as well. I teach in the area of formation and practical theology. And exciting news for us at Eastern Mennonite Seminary is that we just recently received word that we got a significant grant from the Lilly Endowment for a new project. And so this is where our research energies will be going, in addition to programming in the near future. I'll just share a little bit with you about that because this is new and exciting information. Our seminary is part of the larger Eastern Mennonite University. And because of that, we have access to a number of other graduate programs and research centers. And so this particular grant-funded project is partnering with the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University to be able to offer some interdisciplinary training for pastoral leaders in conflict transformation, spiritual formation, and biblical and theological study. So the idea here is to provide resources for pastoral leaders and to have a research arm of this as well, to learn more about leadership in moments of conflict, particularly conflict that feels extended and sometimes intractable in these communities. So we're really excited about that, and that news become public probably in the next week or two. I also wanted to share with you all that the next Global Mennonite Peacebuilding Conference will be hosted by Eastern Mennonite University, and it's going to be next year in June. I believe there was another workshop on this topic. Maybe some of you found yourselves learning about it there as well. But I'm going to see if I can put a link in the chat, and we'll see if this little PDF flyer works, see if you have access to that. But that's some information about that. This is the third Global Mennonite Peacebuilding Conference and Festival.
All right, you finished, Sarah? Okay. Hi, I'm Heidi Regier-Kreider. I serve as conference minister for Western District Conference of Mennonite Church USA, living in Kansas, United States. I've seen some of you on other hello. I do not consider myself a scholar per se. I have a Master of Divinity degree and have served as a pastor or church leader for 25 years, 30 years almost. But I want to share a bit of, I'm interested in what scholarship is happening and how it connects to church ministry and church leadership. So I'm curious and interested in the work that many of you are doing. And I do want to just name some areas of interest or kind of study that we're involved in our setting, or that I'm interested in. One is around restorative solidarity with Indigenous communities. And one great resource in this has been the Healing Histories book written by Elaine Entz and Shed Myers. And that is an area of, I think, of scholarship and of practice and ministry that I am trying to encourage in our congregations.
What's the name again?
Healing Haunted Histories, a settler discipleship of decolonization. I think that's I might have gotten the subtitle wrong. Thank you, Jamie. So that's an area of scholarship and study that I'm interested in. I also would love to see scholarship, Anabaptist scholarship related to sexual ethics as it is relevant for LGBTQ inclusion in the church. What we are hearing from church leaders is we want to be inclusive, or we think we should be inclusive, but we don't have an adequate sexual ethics to guide people in reproductive ethics, ethics around marriage and covenant and gender identity, that our sexual ethics is not really adequate to new experiences and realities that we're facing. And then a third area I'll mention is the need for Spanish language Anabaptist resources, not translations from other theological streams or traditions, but written by and for Anabaptists, Mennonites, that is contextually and culturally competent for Spanish language folks. And I know that there's a lot of work being done in Latin America, and there are connections with like the SEMIA, Anabaptist Theological Seminary, and other institutions. We have a library in our conference, a resource library, and we continue to try to build our collection of Spanish language resources for those congregations and leaders. So.
Hey everyone, I'm Carol Penner. I'm talking to you today from Southern Ontario in Canada. I teach practical theology at Conrad Grebel University College, and I've been doing that for 6 years. Before that, I was a pastor for many years. So one thing I just want to give a little shout out about is the Conrad Grebel Review, which is a journal that my institution puts out 3 times a year, 2 times a year. It's a multidisciplinary journal, and I'll put a link in the chat here. I think I have it queued up. Just they're always accepting ideas for papers if you want to submit something on different topics in the area of theology or peace or engagement with society, anything from an Anabaptist Mennonite perspective. And Derek Suderman, who's one of my colleagues, is the editor of that. When I think about networks or how I'm connected, I would say I'm connected to a group mostly of women scholars who work in the area of abuse and feminism. Abuse generally, domestic violence, sexual abuse of children, but also particularly pastoral sexual misconduct. That's a topic that I network with women about, but we don't have an association or we don't have a group that says this is us, but there's dialogue that's always happening, especially around cases and around how does the church respond. So I'm also very aware of the fact that not all Mennonite churches are open even to women in ministry and women's voices. And lately, in the last couple of days, I've been very attuned to that with the Mennonite Brethren context, because there was a book that was put out about women's stories that was censored by the Mennonite Brethren Conference. And some part of this woman's story was taken out of the book. And that was particularly around LGBTQ inclusion. And so I'm just aware of my networking with those women that were part of that book, and with other women and men who are allies on that topic. And that's a strong connection, even though we don't have an official association of people who are interested in those topics. So that's where I'm at. And so I see Jamie has had to step out for a moment. Glenn, welcome here. We'd love to have you just say a little bit about the type of scholarship you do or networks you're involved with.
Thank you. So my name is Glenn DeVogue. That's how you pronounce the last name, like the woman's magazine in New York, DeVogue magazine. And I teach at California State University, Dominguez Hills. And so I'm Mennonite, but it's a public university. So how do you add a Mennonite perspective to a public university? And so I wrote a book called Critical Literacies, where you think about different perspectives, different points of view. And I've written actually quite a few articles in the Reading Teacher and places like that. I'm interested in this perspective that we don't have in social studies, because that's one of my areas, social studies, because the healing haunted histories, good alliteration. Healing haunted histories is really good. It seems good because we've ignored that area, and also Black histories and Mexican American histories. But even probably more appropriate to the Mennonite context is peace. So James Junkie, he wrote a book called The Missing Piece. And in it, he talked about the fact that peacemakers don't really have a history, right? They're not very well known in history books. If you read history or historical fiction, well, not historical fiction, but history books, it's often war to war to war, right? But who talks about making peace? So I think that would be a very interesting missing piece in the social studies curriculum, integrating those peacemakers. Otherwise, I guess I've I taught a class of Afghan women in Bangladesh at Asian University for Women. I just volunteered because they're just getting started in their master's program. But these women are probably big time radicals. They seem more conservative to me, but they're, you know, they're out of the university or out of the country, and they're doing work in they'll do work in schools that they set up in Pakistan. So that should be that's been really cool to get to know them personally. So I guess that's it for me. Jamie, are you up?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry that I had to step out there. I had a contractor come and try to dig a hole in my front yard that did not need to be dug. So I had to run out and prevent that from happening. But really grateful to hear from each of you. And I'm struck by the different kind of affiliations, and this really does, if any of you do remember that old Anabaptist Mennonite Scholars Network blue newsletter, this is the kind of mix of people that were engaging through that. People who might have some Mennonite connections, but maybe working in an institutional context that's not connected at all to the Mennonites or the church. Others, like myself, working within a Mennonite institution. Others who are independent scholars or PhD students. And so this network is certainly meant to serve all the people that are on this call. And I loved hearing some of these different suggestions for research activities and ways that we might facilitate and promote certain research on certain themes or topics. And so I think that's it's an interesting question, what a network like this can do to help promote some of these different kinds of topics. One of the questions I have for you, given again that we're in this Mennonite World Conference setting, what, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we intended for this to be in person in Indonesia, and that is not happening. One of the goals we've been pursuing is trying to have a more global audience and global connection, and that was why we scheduled a Mennonite World Conference workshop, and that's not probably very well represented here in this call. It seems like we're all North American or European. And so I guess the question has sort of two dimensions. One, what might a network like this do to connect in general from your perspective with the work of Mennonite World Conference as you understand it? And two, you know, this is not obviously the ideal group to process this conversation, but what ideas might you have in terms of ways we could connect research? I mean, I'm thinking, Heidi, of your great point about the need for more Spanish language resources. What might a network like this do to further that kind of an aim? That it's not simply encouraging more translations of North American or Europeans into other languages, but really facilitating, supporting the research activities that are already going on in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So again, the first part of the question is a kind of general Mennonite World Conference question. Any thoughts about how to continue supporting or serving a Mennonite World Conference audience? And relatedly, specifically thinking beyond North America and Europe, what might a network like this do to serve Global South research? Any thoughts on those questions?
Well, one of the question that comes to my mind initially is who are the people doing the research? Who are the partners that you would want to connect with, that we want to connect with. I tend to be more tied into church leaders, not research academicians or scholars or that kind of community. And so I'm curious for any of you, if you know, like, do names come to mind of individuals or of institutions in other parts of the world that would be go-to points of contact?
And I'll just say, on our normal annual calls, Cesar Moya from Colombia, who edits the Relea Journal, is a regular contributor, but we have not been successful in getting others involved from Latin America. So if that question stands, I would love to hear other ideas in Latin America and beyond.
So this newsletter, is it still happening or not?
Yeah, sorry, I shared the image before you got on. Let me find my screen.
And also, Sarah, is there a website for that conference?
Let me look for it. I'll put it in the chat if I can find it. There is.
And so, Glenn, here's what the newsletter looks like now. It's a website.
Oh, cool.
With lots and lots of links and the invitation to submit your info. I'll share that again.
Great.
In the chat.
Maybe I mean, I'm really speaking from my perspective as a young academic, or like starting really with research. I would love to have an exchange, like sort of a colloquium with other young researchers, Anabaptist researchers. For me, like I belong like to the first generation who is sort of able to go into academia in my family, right? So there is sort of a lack of direct connection to people who can also like really help and or like just sort of where you have an exchange also on this level and can connect these different thoughts together. So that I think, or I can imagine that could also be relevant for other people who are more in these central areas. And even like the possibility of or that was something that I didn't like right away find on the page when I explored it before, like sort of contacts or like even I don't know, is there an academia network or something where like a group or something where we could like, just to find, like, for example, what's it called in English? A supervisor, like a PhD supervisor or someone like that.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, just on the first part of your comments, so there's a North American kind of graduate student conference, and there's a European one I'm sure you're aware of. But that's a really intriguing. I mean, I'm aware of scholars throughout Latin America, some of them with PhDs in anthropology, Mennonites, or anthropologists studying Mennonites in Latin America that I'm connected with for various reasons. But what would it be like to get some of these folks from different continents together? That is very intriguing. And yeah, the social networking kind of dimension. Yeah, I mean, when I think about exploring as a new Mennonite, I became a Mennonite in my master's program, and then exploring. I had no idea that Toronto existed. I mean, as an American, US American, I barely knew Toronto existed, unfortunately. But I had no idea about the Mennonite Center there. I had no idea about the Free University of Amsterdam with its activities. I mean, there are kind of Mennonite scholarly hubs that aren't really advertised as such, unless you're kind of in the know. And that's an intriguing thought about what would a sort of network be like that helped connect people a bit better.
I mean, like an option would also, like, I'm again thinking as a designer, like really just have a map with these centers, because like it's so hard when you start to really find the information, right? I think especially this the website that you have does such a good job in like bringing together stuff, and then like having an overview of these different centers also on the map or something.
I love that. Yeah, you're sparking a lot of ideas for how we could develop this. That's exciting.
Well, there is that website you have, Jamie, has a lot of lectures from all kinds of colleges. If you, Elaine, if you look at the, like, from the top, there's a call for paper conferences, and then there are these lectures and events. And if you look down all the universities that exist there, that seems like a really good place. I mean, that would fill my plate over and over again.
I think what I hear part of what Elaine is suggesting is taking a designer's view as, you know, the list is a bit intimidating. I really like the idea of a map that you could kind of have different filters for. So it's like higher education institutions, Mennonite higher education institutions around the world, Mennonite seminaries, doctoral programs affiliated with Mennonites, you know. And then another filter that might have like lectures over the next year or something like that. I can see how that would be a really useful tool, especially for those of us whose minds kind of go blank when you just see a ever scrolling list.
I think I also hear Elaine. Is it Elaine or Eliana?
It's Elian, but
Elaine.
Elian. Okay.
Okay. I maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I also maybe hear you looking for relationships, for connections with people, not just an institution or an event or a journal, but with people, with the actual conversation partners, with the scholars, with the mentors, the people who are doing the thinking, but not just the ideas, but the people who are doing that, and how to make those connections and conversations seems important. It's really embodied connections. The visual and the people relationships is embodied. It's not simply an intellectual exercise, but it is geographically and physically represented in some ways with the people that we're connecting with, and the places that the context from which the scholarship comes seems important, to not be disembodied from that, but to be connected to those people in those places.
This may be way too much to think about logistically, but I'm thinking about some of the guilds I'm part of where I log into the website because I'm a member, and then I can see all the other members and have access to their contact information if they've allowed it to be up. So I'm just imagining it would be really exciting to be able to see who the other Anabaptist Mennonite scholars around the world are that I may not know through Carol or through other folks who I know already, to be able to go in there and make some connections around areas of shared scholarship and interests. But that would add a whole nother layer to the website that might be way too much. But that would be neat to find some kind of way to develop that.
No, I mean, the funny thing is that actually existed a few years ago, and nobody used it. And so when we rebooted the network, we got rid of that because no one was using it. But
Oh, okay.
I mean, let me just say this was a kind of web format. It probably was, from the early 2000s or late 90s. It was not easy to access.
Sure.
And speaking of design, it was not particularly well designed. So it was not necessarily the most inviting kind of network tool. So I think it's helpful to hear that there could be an audience and participants for something like that if it were done well.
Yeah, the areas of research, like Eliane was talking about, if you find, I think if you go to the journals and you look for articles that you resonate with, kind of your area, and then you email them. I know usually scholars are pretty good at responding. Maybe they're not. I'm always, when people talk about my research, I always get excited. So, and then you find out what conferences they go to and meet with them at their conference. It's hard because you're in one place and you're probably the only expert in that area. Then the other experts are like wherever. So you just have to, I always get to them through journals and so on. My most famous journal article I wrote and sent for publication before I ever met her, before I ever saw even what she looked like. There was no Zoom or anything. We were just emailing, and so that was a 20-year relationship. But we got connected through publications and friends.
Well, that's helpful feedback. Thank you.
Oh,
No, go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, I'm looking at those of you who are affiliated with as professors or staff at academic institutions. And some of your institutions have international programs or receive quite a few international students. And I'm wondering if those are channels to build on or to use as exploration vehicles. Are there connections or people there that could be, used? What I don't know enough to know how to ask the question, but yeah, there's international connections there. So, and there certainly will be scholarship happening or study, at least academic study going on. So, right, is there any potential from those things?
The European Peace session this morning was pretty amazing. That was pretty amazing. So if you didn't catch that, go to that and see the speakers, because that was pretty cool. A lot of cool stuff going on over there, not so much over here.
Well, my hunch is the Anabaptist Mennonite peace building conferences that have been happening have been a place where people have been connecting globally. I would say at Conrad Grebel, we have very few international students, maybe 1 or 2 a year, but maybe AMBS has many more, or EMU, I'm not sure.
We have quite a few, or probably over 30% of our student body now is international. Most of that would be from Africa. And I have to take my hat off to Sarah again, because in the journal issue of Anabaptist Witness that she and Public Hymn just put out included an essay by one of our Ethiopian students in Dawaka. So that was really exciting. Anabaptist Witness, I will say, we try to publish in multiple languages and to publish Global South voices as much as possible. My social media assistant is Chilean, and he's done a lot of blog posts getting Latin American writers to contribute there in Spanish. And we've had over the years many contributors in Spanish. So but it takes a lot of work, and it takes constant kind of like asking that same question and figuring out year to year, okay, how are we gonna do this? Because I just reviewed this morning the submissions to the October issue, and it's all, white North American English speakers. Like, okay, I gotta ask that question again. How do we do this? So, and Sarah, I don't know if you have anything you want to say from EMS.
Yeah, our Eastern Mennonite Seminary international population is minimal, but in terms of the student body, where we have the largest numbers of international students would be in our Center for Justice and Peace building. We just had our Summer Peace Building Institute running for 3 weeks on campus here, and I sat in on one of the courses, and I think 75% of those students were not from the United States. So there's a lot of activity, particularly over the summer, but some throughout the academic year as well, in terms of working with and learning to know colleagues who are coming to study at the Center for Justice and Peace building.
Maybe in this regard also, the European institutions could be interesting, because there are different countries where it's like a lot cheaper, at least, than the US to study, and which have also very good like international programs. So like either like really go through the institutions in Europe and the alumni that they have. I can also like maybe it would also be an option to really if it was more transparent where like people where Mennonite researchers are, we could also like inform or provide information about like what kinds of international programs they have, and then be sort of a link there as a researcher or a mentor in that specific place, even if it's not directly affiliated to a Mennonite university.
Those are helpful suggestions, Eliana. Thank you. I mean, I mentioned earlier, from my perspective at least, and I'd love to hear additional locations I'm unaware of, but the Toronto and the FU in Amsterdam are really the kind of 2 hubs for doctoral study for Mennonites, and both of them have pretty strong international student participation. And I know the FU, in collaboration with a number of other Mennonite related institutions, I think in some Baptist institutions, started a new book series recently. So I'm hopeful that some of those doctoral students there will be publishing I know they've got really strong connections with both Indonesia and Colombia. A lot of students from Indonesia and Colombia going through their master's and doctoral programs. So that's a really good suggestion. Well, this is a really rich set of suggestions and really visions for how we might connect. I loved, Heidi, you put it in some ways summarizing Eliana's point earlier, but I think in a more thematic way that speaks to me about some of what I'm hearing. Kind of visualizing things a bit differently, looking a bit differently, and maybe helping represent visually some of the connections in a new and more compelling way. But the embodied character of the connections as well, I'm hearing that as something that's really important. So there's lots of little things happening here and there, and hopefully the website, and even with a better design, would do even better at helping connect people. But perhaps we might think about facilitating some kind of eventually in person, or at least online kind of connections, research connections that would maybe getting young researchers across the world in conversation. That seems like a really worthwhile project. Before we end, I just want to give space if there's any other kinds of suggestions that you would have. I think the title that we chose for this session is Research Across Borders, and I've tried to suggest that this Anabaptist Mennonite Scholarship Network is trying to support research across borders, research connections across borders, research collaboration, research information across borders. And if there's any kind of last thoughts that you'd want me to take away to discuss with Kyle and others that were at Toronto and the Mennonite Seminary here in Elkhart, Indiana, where I work, ways that we might develop this network to serve your work, to help connect researchers across borders.
Is there a way to chunk the research, or people who are interested in certain areas of research, chunk them into categories, kind of to help them think about a particular area? I mean, actually, I would kind of look in journals, and I guess do a search in journals just to find some of those people. But especially for newer scholars, trying to find your group is so important. I would be interested in hearing people. Well, I get a lot of information today about history and websites I can go to investigate those. But like the certain conferences, they have subgroups, like single interest groups, right? And then you go to the conference, but then there's a small subset of that conference who are interested in a particular area, and they get together and chat about things. Because sometimes the conferences they're just too big, and the categories of things are spread out too wide. Or some conferences, they have themes, but I haven't been to any of these conferences, so you probably know that that's already happening. And maybe conferences in places like Jamaica or Hawaii.
Yes, well, I mean, the other thing I should say is we, some of us were actually trying to plan a conference on Anabaptist theology and liberation theology to occur prior to the conference in Indonesia, with the idea that would specifically try to really facilitate the participation of Global South scholars. And so we had another kind of blow to that with not meeting here. But that's still a vision, and yes, to meet in places that are accessible and pleasant is certainly a goal.
Bring your family, that kind of place.
Exactly.
Mennonite conferences often happen in places that most people don't really want to travel, like Winnipeg in winter.
Or Elkhart any time of year. Oh wait, I shouldn't say that. No, it's a great point. It is a great point. Well, we will keep trying, and I'd love to be in conversation. Oh yes, Heidi.
Oh, I have a closing thought if you're still
Please.
taking them.
Yes, sorry.
For consideration. Since the question here partly was how can the scholarly network serve Mennonite World Conference or the church or work through Mennonite World Conference in that context. I'm thinking from the church perspective here. And two questions that might ponder as you go along is, one is what do you think the church is looking for from scholarship, or what is the relationship between scholarship and the church? What can scholarship offer the church? What is the goal of scholarship in relation to the church? There are a lot of ways to ask that question, but I think that relationship matters if we're wondering how to engage Mennonite World Conference, because those are church bodies.
Exactly.
Right. And then secondly, who is the we that is doing this work, and to what extent does the scholarly community look critically on itself and ask about transformation around issues like colonization and power and privilege, so that it's not us doing something for them, but it is we working together in what needs to happen in this conversation. And who is that we? Those are the kinds of questions in the church we're wrestling with, around systemic racism and privilege and healing haunted histories and racism. So I'm curious, how do those kinds of dynamics apply to scholarship? And I know it's happening. I know there's critical scholarship that is looking carefully at those kinds of questioning our paradigms and our systems and structures and how we do scholarship. So those would just be two areas.
Thank you so much for both of those points. And I think the heart of this question, it has to be the heart of the question of how do we do scholarship across borders? How do we connect scholars across borders? Has to have your question there at its center. So thank you for articulating that. Any other closing thoughts here?
I just want to say thank you for hosting this, Jamie.
Thanks, Carol. And since you commented here, I want to say that I've had playing in my mind some of your recent publications, and particularly the one on conferences that I heard you give us a conference paper in British Columbia at Trinity Western. Carol has written some really amazing pieces, really looking at Women Doing Theology Conference and the MCC Women's Concerns publication that, from my perspective, really provide an orientation towards your first question, Heidi. How do we think about the relationship between scholarship and the church? What might be some of the kind of ethical norms that, as we even plan conferences, to design, kind of how do we design conferences that break down some of these barriers? I have learned tremendously from your work, Carol, on that, and recommend that to all of you. So we have a question for you from Sarah here. What publications would the others find those writings in, Carol? You're muted here.
Specifically, that one article I wrote, that was in a volume edited by Jeremy Bergen and Laura Schmidt. The papers from that conference were published in a volume, and the volume's title is escaping me.
Recovering from the Anabaptist Vision.
Yes, that's it. Recovering. I'll type it in there.
That's the one on conferences. The one on kind of the women's concerns publications is in the Liberating the Politics of Jesus volume.
Yeah. And that one was published through IMS. No, it wasn't, was it?
It was. Both of those were actually.
Yeah.
Carol is our most frequent author.
Making up for lost time, David. I mean, Jamie. Yeah. Crazy.
We're
You know,
glad to learn from you.
Well, while this is a really good network for like exploring new horizons, I wonder if there's some kind of place for more bringing those ideas into the popular arena, like through plays and fiction and children's stories. Because I'm not sure how many people read the Conrad Grebel Journal, but it's probably not reaching a wide enough audience for us to get a significant effort in the United States to stop this crazy war machine that we got here, that we all contribute to. So we're all hard to pay taxes, and it's hard to avoid them too. But bringing it to that wider audience, I don't know, like plays and TV shows and in art, that will broaden maybe the audience that we have. I don't know. Seems like you guys are already doing a lot.
But it's a great point. And the only center, and others may know of other activities. Well, actually, I was at a conference at EMU a few weeks ago, and there were some interesting things happening there in terms of the arts. I'll let Sarah speak to that. But the conference that I mentioned that Carol and I attended a few years ago at Trinity Western, Myron Penner, who has the Center for Anabaptist Studies, I don't remember what it's called.
Humanitas
Center, yes. They mostly do plays and other kinds of things, and it's a really interesting model that Myron has. He's a philosopher, but he is also really facilitating some artistic kind of activities there.
Where is that, Jamie?
It's in British Columbia.
But I mean, how do I get to it on the website?
Oh, sure. You can Google Humanitas Center Anabaptism. I don't remember all the.
Humanitas University? No. Center.
It's at Trinity Western University.
Okay.
So again, others may be aware of other activities that I am not.
That's cool. Oh my goodness. There's Venus on the front.
Well, okay. I am really grateful to each of you for coming and expanding my horizons here. And I would love to stay in conversation. So that's why I put my email. I think I'm in touch with some of you already. But again, this network, the purpose is to serve all of you in the work you're doing. And I say all of you, thinking about the specifics that each of you have shared about. So really grateful for each of you and what each of you have shared. Thank you so much.
It was great meeting everyone.